how, as you travel around the country and other cities, how can you tell a Unitarian Universalist church when you see them?
Rainbows.
Because instead of a cross on top, it has a question mark. When I was a child, we learned to respond to verbal attacks from other people, other children, other friends we hung out. Things such as, you're dumb, you're ugly, you're fat, you're scrawny, whatever the insult might have been. We learned to respond with that sing-song incantation. I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? And now I smile to realize that I am part of a faith tradition whose adherents often find it easier to explain what they do not believe than what they do. We often resemble a support group, Religions Anonymous. I was raised Baptist. I grew up Catholic. I used to be Jewish. We have you pagans, you Christians, humanists, atheists, social activists, and the undecided. I know you are, but what am I? I almost forgot. I did forget. I'd like to pass these out. If you'll just take one and pass them along, you will find on there a statement of our sources, and that is what I'm going to speak about. The living tradition we share draws from many sources, as it says in this statement of principles you are holding. 6 of them, 6 sources are listed just beneath those familiar to some of us affirmations. We affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And beneath that, you will see our official list of sources of our faith. The Christmas season is upon us, for better or for worse. So I chose to begin this 6-part series of sermons on our sources by discussing number 4, Christianity, Jewish and Christian teachings. When I became the minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Valdosta, I was let in on a little story regarding the history of the building they were occupying. The building looked a lot like this church structure down here on the main road and 8th Street as we pass to come in, the white building with the belfry there. The church in Valdosta had formerly been a Catholic church, complete with a cross on the top of the steeple. The UUs bought the building, and the great debate ensued. What to do about that cross? And then in the midst of the sometimes heated debate, the cross suddenly disappeared. One Sunday people came to church and it simply wasn't there. After years of serving the church and gaining some credibility with certain members, I was entrusted with the truth about that cross, which miraculously reappeared about the time that we bought land and put the older building up for sale. I have since come to discover that this is not an unusual story at all within our association. In fact, at some point during the last 50 years or so, says UU Minister Bruce Clear, The vast majority of our Unitarian churches in the country removed a cross from prominent display in their sanctuary. They have been moved to smaller chapels, hidden in closets, stored away and forgotten somewhere in the cobweb history of our movement. 20 years ago, the Reverend Duke Gray, minister of First Unitarian Church of Chicago, wrote an article titled, "Was Dracula a Unitarian?" In the 1600s, you see, Unitarianism flourished in Transylvania, what became Romania. Home of Francis David, a Unitarian hero who petitioned King Sigismund for an edict of religious toleration. Today, of course, Transylvania is best known as what? The home of Dracula. The legend of Dracula, Reverend Duke reminds us, includes this curious fact. Dracula was frightened of crosses. Many vampire movies recognize that old cliche of pulling out a cross-shaped object to intimidate or frighten off the undead creatures. According to Bruce Clear's sermon, the Reverend Duke suggested that Unitarians today, like Dracula, suffer from an ailment he calls cross cringe. We are afraid of them, he said, and when we are around them, our feelings range from mild discomfort to rigid antagonism. Now, this phobia of crucifixes isn't really hard to understand when we know the route that our faith took to come to Unitarian Universalism as it exists today. We plainly and simply lost the competition for the right to define the nature and direction of the Christian faith. In the grinding wheel of history, the Unitarians and the Universalists became the heretics. And there is no denying that the vast majority of UUs no longer consider themselves to be Christian. Nor, surprisingly maybe, is this a 21st or even a 20th century phenomenon. Some 200 years ago, Reverend Bruce points out, the famous Unitarian minister William Ellery Channing presented a very well-known sermon on Christianity, a defining sermon, in which he said, quote, "When I think what Christianity has become in the hands of politicians and priests, how it has crushed the soul for ages, how it has struck the intellect with palsy and haunted the imagination with superstitious phantoms. When I think how under almost every form of this religion," Channing preached, "its ministers have hewn and compressed it into the shape of rigid creeds. When I consider in a word how Christianity has been and still is exhibited in forms which shock alike the reason, conscience, and heart, I feel deeply, painfully, what a different system it is from that which Jesus taught." End quote. And I think, in a nutshell, that's the issue between Unitarian Universalism and Christianity. Long ago, and on many different fronts, we lost the war to save Christianity from the ownership of those who made it a religion about Jesus rather than the religion of Jesus. So, as Reverend Clear said, in the last century, the cross has been placed in the closet for safekeeping. Today, our association's covenant, you will see on those cards, does not even mention Jesus. Instead, our sources recognize the contributions of, quote, Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. But Bruce believes the religion that Jesus taught is still very much a part of us. It is the Christianity of today which has little to do with who we are. That is what inspired me many years ago in Valdosta to preach a sermon called Why I Am Christian, followed the next week by one titled Why I Am Not a Christian. Both of these declarations are true. Here's the difference as I see it. In one statement, the term Christian is a verb. In the second, it is a noun. I believe that we are called to be Christ-like or Christian, if you will, in our actions and lifestyles. We are called to serve the world, not to join a club. There are really two radically different religions in the New Testament, says Bruce. I have with me today one of my cherished Bibles. In fact, I brought 4 of them. You know someone is unfamiliar with us when they walk into a UU meeting with a Bible and a cross. This is a Christian church, right? We've been asked. Well, I know you are, but what am I? I've got you figured out with your label. Just how open is our door? How welcoming are we? Now this Bible, this very special Bible, was given to me by my oldest brother, David, who has since passed away. It was a Christmas gift in 1974. It's what is known as a red letter edition. And who can tell me what that means?
You know that.
They are Bibles printed with the words of Jesus in red ink. And Reverend Bruce calls this a Unitarian Bible. Because if you examine, he said, only the words of Jesus, you will find nothing resembling a Trinitarian formula which asks us to worship him as if he were a God. Nothing. This point of view was shared by Thomas Jefferson, who was convinced that the teachings of Jesus were incomplete in the Bible and had suffered badly at the hands of those who had edited them. So Jefferson did what any good Unitarian might have done. He wrote his own Jefferson Bible. As UU minister Forrest Church said in his introduction to this 1989 edition, still available from Beacon Press, He said it was Jesus' unusual life on earth, made unusual by the simple eloquence of his teachings, that truly mattered. Now remember, it was Jefferson who penned that wonderful quote, "It is in our lives and not our words that our religion must be read." I saw a show several years ago on JCTV, Jesus Christ Television. It was called Red Letter Christianity. One of the guests on the show, Shane Claiborne, posited the idea that Jesus himself was homeless. Jesus was an itinerant minister who traveled the countryside. And Shane asked, how can we worship a homeless man on Sunday and ignore one on Monday? Claiborne lived among the homeless and ministered to them. He was confronted by another Christian critical of his radical motives, who asked him, "You're feeding people in order to spread the gospel, right?" Shane's response, "No, sir. We are feeding people because that is the gospel." "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" What was the answer? Love God and love your neighbor. That is it. So simple, isn't it? Let's spend a lifetime learning how to do that. But who is my neighbor? Now, you used today would probably ask instead, but who is my God? Reverend Clear reminds us the religion Jesus taught has to do with loving your enemies, caring for the needy, putting principle above wealth and power, accepting those who are different, showing mercy, seeking justice. Or, as Jesus himself put it in bold red type, "I have come to preach good news to the poor, proclaim release to the captives, recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed." I grew up Southern Baptist, my confession. I was taught a creedal religion filled with right and wrong beliefs, where being saved and being right became the two most important things about Christianity. And being saved meant taking one trip down the aisle. Saved by faith, not by works. Those were the magic Baptist words. Just accept Jesus and go to heaven. People who think about marriage the way they think about salvation are in for a rocky road through life, aren't they? I said I do. That's all I need. I'm good for life. But that was not the faith of Jesus. Jesus said over and over to those religious fanatics of his day, "You hypocrites, you devour widows' houses while you make long prayers. You fools and blind men, you tithe your mint and dill and cumin, yet you neglect justice and mercy and faithfulness. Hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of robbery and self-indulgence." Sounds familiar? I was taught the plan of salvation But I give thanks that I was also blessed in that Baptist upbringing to be taught the value of love in human relations. I met people along the way who taught me what it really meant to be Christian. The verb, not the noun. My ethics professor, Dr. Henley Barnett, who invited Martin Luther King in the 1960s to Southern Seminary. Dr. Barnett used to joke that he had to wear asbestos gloves to open his mail. I met Florence Jordan, who with her husband Clarence founded Koinonia Farms, a Christian commune in deep South Georgia in 1942. And I was blessed with an opportunity to spend a summer there. Long before the civil rights movement, Koinonia was based on the belief that God is colorblind, that all people deserve to be paid a fair wage for a day's work. This is a rural Christian commune in deep South Georgia, a farming community. The Jordans read in the New Testament book of Acts what being saved by the Spirit really meant. This is what it said. All that believe, this is after what's called the Day of Pentecost. The Holy Spirit descended upon the Christians. And it says, all that believed were together and had all things common, and sold their possessions and goods, and parted them to all according to their need. They lived communally. And Clarence read this, and he said, that isn't the church I grew up in. So Clarence, the Georgia farmer with a bachelor in agriculture and a doctorate in Greek from Southern Baptist Seminary, wrote his own translation called the Cotton Patch Version. Instead of Jews and Gentiles, you have blacks and whites. Instead of Jesus being crucified, he's lynched from a tree. Not to make fun at all, but to help the local people get the hard and gritty reality of the story. By the way, Koinonia is still going on today. The Christmas season is upon us, and there's no denying that beneath it all, it's still a Christian holiday. Reverend Clear suggested that the cross will never be central to Unitarian Universalism again. We have moved beyond the limits and the strictures of our former faith. But he said, neither should we altogether remove the cross and the tradition it represents. We should take it out of that closet once in a while, dust it off, and honor it. Like that cross in Valdosta. Now you see it, now you don't. I remember a song we used to sing. It went something like this. We are one in the Spirit, we are one in the Lord, and they'll know we are Christians by our love. If people mistake me for Christian because of my actions in the love department, I'll be happy with that. After all, love is a verb.